In the midst of the despair of a millionaire searching for his wife, who has been missing for over a year, a new thread of hope emerges in the poor streets of the city. It all begins when a humble girl points to the poster of the woman and says with alarming nonchalance that she lives in my house. The tension explodes when the millionaire rushes to confirm the story and ends up facing through a window the face of his wife, who no longer recognizes him. It is in this clash between past and present that the truth reveals. A tale of love, loss, and divided identities that no one could have imagined. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the mansion in Beverly Hills, but Robert Miller barely noticed the light. Sitting at the breakfast table, he held once again the photograph he carried everywhere. Helen, her smile captured in a moment of pure happiness, her brown hair cascading over her shoulders, her bright eyes fixed on the camera. That photo had been taken just 2 weeks before everything changed, 423 days. Robert knew exactly how many days had passed since that fateful morning. He woke up, reached out for her side of the bed, and found only cold sheets. He thought she had gone downstairs for breakfast, but when he arrived in the kitchen, the house was empty, completely empty. Her clothes still in the closet, her toothbrush in the bathroom, her favorite purse on the vanity, everything in place except for her. No note, no explanation, no clue. Robert rose from the table and walked to the office, where an entire wall had been transformed into an investigation mural. Maps of Los Angeles, notes, phone numbers of private investigators, clippings of possible sightings that had led nowhere. Every inch of that wall represented his obsession, his despair, his refusal to accept what everyone else had already accepted. There were also photos pinned with colored pins, each color representing a different area of the city where he had already searched. Red for the south side, blue for the north, green for the east, yellow for the west. The center was covered in orange. Practically the entire city was marked. He had scoured hospitals, police stations, shelters, every corner where Helen could be. He had spoken to hundreds of people, shown the photo thousands of times, always receiving the same response. "No, sir, I haven't seen that woman." His friends had suggested therapy. His business partner had gently hinted that perhaps it was time to accept and move on, that the company needed him focused. Even Richard, his best friend since college, had said he was worried that Robert was consuming himself in this search. But how could he stop? How could he simply give up on the woman he loved? Helen was not just any stranger. She was his wife, his partner, the person he knew best in the world. They had shared dreams, built a life together, overcome the terrible pain of losing a baby. After all that, how could he simply accept that she had gone away? No, Robert thought, looking at the obsessive mural. Something was wrong. Helen wouldn't leave voluntarily. Something had happened to her, and he was going to find out what. No matter how long it took. Mary, the housekeeper who had worked with them for 15 years, entered quietly with a cup of fresh coffee. She said nothing, just placed the cup on the table and looked at him with that expression Robert had learned to hate. Pity. Everyone looked at him with pity. "You need to move on, Robert," they said. "It's been over a year. You've done everything you could. Sometimes people just leave. Maybe she wanted to start over. Maybe she was unhappy." But Robert knew that wasn't true. Helen was happy. They were happy. The night before her disappearance, they had dined together, talked about plans to renovate the garden, laughed at a silly story she told about a client from the art gallery where she worked. There were no signs, no hints that anything was wrong. He grabbed his coat and the folder with the posters. 300 new posters printed last week, the photo of Helen enlarged, her details, his phone number. Generous reward for information. He had already distributed thousands of them throughout the city, but he kept going. Every day, without exception, Robert would leave in the morning and cover a different neighborhood. Today would be the East Side, neighborhoods he had never visited before Helen disappeared. places where asphalt gave way to uneven cobblestones, where houses piled on top of each other, where life was tough and people had more immediate concerns than looking at posters of missing women. The driver, Mr. Johnson, waited in the car. Robert dismissed him. He preferred to go alone, walking the streets, feeling the city, as if somehow that brought him closer to Helen. He drove for nearly an hour until he reached Eastside Gardens, a neighborhood of narrow streets and simple houses, very different from the luxury world he lived in. He parked the car and began to walk with the folder under his arm. People looked at him with curiosity. A well-dressed man, clearly from another social class, walking there with determination. Robert was already used to the stairs. He stopped at a pole and began to paste a poster. An elderly lady passed by and glanced briefly at the photo before continuing on her way. A group of teenagers snickered at him quietly, but Robert didn't care. Nothing mattered except finding Helen. He pasted 5 more posters in succession. At a bakery, he asked the owner for permission to leave some at the counter. The man agreed with a tired nod. He had probably seen dozens of cases like this. People disappeared every day, especially in a giant city like Los Angeles. Most were never found, but Helen was not most people. Helen was special. She had to be somewhere. Robert continued down the main street, then turned onto a side street. The houses here were even more. The older buildings, some with cracks in the walls, others with rusty gates. Children played barefoot in the street, enjoying their school holidays. One of them, a girl of perhaps 7 or 8 years with messy braids and a simple dress, watched Robert from a distance. He pasted another flyer on a peeling wall, and the girl approached timidly. She stood beside him, looking at the picture. Robert finished securing the paper and turned to leave when he heard a soft voice. "Sir," he looked down. The girl had her eyes fixed on the flyer, her head slightly tilted as if she were trying to remember something important. "Yes," Robert replied, trying to sound kind despite the exhaustion weighing on his soul. "This woman," the girl pointed to the picture of Helen, "she lives in my house." The world stopped. Robert felt as if all the air had been sucked out of his lungs. He stood completely still, staring at that child, trying to process the words he had just heard. Could it be possible? After 423 days, after dozens of investigators, thousands of flyers, countless sleepless nights, a small girl in a poor neighborhood had the answer. His voice faltered on the first attempt. He swallowed hard and tried again. "Are you sure? Look closely at the picture. Are you sure it's her?" The girl stepped closer to the flyer, studying every detail of the image. Her small eyes carefully traced Helen's face. Then she nodded. "It's her. She lives with me and my dad. I call her Mommy." The word hit Robert like a punch to the stomach. Mommy. Helen had no children. They had tried for years, gone through treatments, faced disappointments. Helen wanted so much to be a mother. How could a stranger's child be calling his wife Mommy? Robert felt his legs weaken, and he leaned against the wall. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, trying not to scare the girl with the intensity of his emotions. He crouched down to her level, his hands visibly trembling. "What is she like?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Describe her to me." The girl seemed to think for a moment. "She's pretty, has long hair like this." She gestured with her hands, showing shoulder length. "And she's very caring with me, makes tasty food and helps me with my homework. But sometimes she gets sad, you know. She stares into space and looks like she's trying to remember something, but she can't." The words echoed in Robert's mind. What had happened to Helen? Why was she living with this child and her father? Why hadn't she come home? "Can you take me to her?" Robert asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Please, it's very important." The girl looked at him cautiously. "My dad said not to bring strangers home." "I'm not a stranger." Robert pulled out his wallet and showed his ID. "This is my name, Robert Miller." The woman in this picture, the one you call Mommy, she is my wife. She disappeared over a year ago. I've been looking for her every day since then." The girl's eyes widened in surprise. She looked from the picture to Robert, then back to the flyer on the wall. "What happened to her?" "I don't know." Robert felt tears threatening to appear, but he fought them back. "One day she was with me. The next day she was gone. No one knew what had happened until now." The girl bit her lip, clearly torn between helping and obeying her father's instructions. Finally she said, "My dad found her a long time ago. She was hurt and didn't remember anything. He took her to the hospital and then brought her to our house because she had nowhere to go. Hurt." Robert felt a tightness in his chest. Helen had been hurt. Something terrible had happened to her. And now she was living with people he didn't know, without memory, without knowing who she really was. "Does she know her name?" Robert asked. "She says her name is Lena, but when we ask her last name, she doesn't know, just Lena." Lena, so close to Helen. Robert felt a growing certainty that he had found his wife. All the pieces fit together. The sudden disappearance, the memory loss, the similar name, it had to be her. "Please," Robert pleaded, his voice heavy with emotion. "Please, take me to her. I just need to see her just once. After that, if she doesn't want to come with me, I will leave. But I need to know if it's really her. Do you understand?" The girl looked at the desperation on his face, and something in her expression softened. She nodded slowly. "Okay, but my dad will be mad at me." "I will explain everything to your dad," Robert promised. "He will understand. You are doing a good thing. You are helping to reunite a family." The girl started walking, and Robert followed her, his heart beating so fast he could hear it in his ears. Each step felt like an eternity. They turned onto one street, then another, entered a narrow alley. The houses here were even simpler. Some barely had paint on the walls. The girl stopped in front of a small house with a faded blue iron gate. "This is it." Robert looked at the modest building. Helen was inside. After more than a year of searching, after scouring the entire city, she was just a few steps away. He felt a wave of emotion so intense that he had to lean against the gate. The girl pushed the door open and went in. Robert followed her, his whole body trembling with anticipation and fear. Fear of what he might find. Fear that it might not be Helen. Fear that it was Helen, but she wouldn't recognize him. The inside of the house, it was clean but extremely simple. A small room with an old sofa, an antique television, cheap fabric curtains, and the smell of home-cooked food wafting from the kitchen. Robert stopped in the middle of the room, unable to move as he waited, and then he saw her. A woman slowly descended the stairs. Robert held onto the wall to keep from falling. It was her, Helen. Her hair was a bit shorter. She looked thinner, wearing simple clothes he had never seen, but it was unmistakably her, his Helen. She paused on the last step and looked around the room, her gaze first passing over the girl and then landing on Robert. There was no recognition in her eyes, just polite curiosity, as if he were a salesman or some random visitor. "Julia, who is this gentleman?" Helen asked softly, and Robert felt another blow as he realized she didn't even know her own last name, but she knew the girl's name. Julia looked nervously from Robert to Helen. "He was putting up a poster outside, and I saw the picture. Is it you, Mommy? The poster has you on it." Helen frowned in confusion. She stepped down the last step and walked closer. Robert couldn't move. He was paralyzed, taking in every detail of her, the way she moved her hands, the way she tilted her head when she was thoughtful. Everything was exactly as he remembered. "A poster?" Helen asked, looking at Robert with more attention. Now, with my picture, Robert finally found his voice. "Helen, you are Helen Miller. You disappeared a year and 2 months ago. I am your husband, Robert." The silence that followed was heavy. Helen looked at him as if he had spoken in another language. She slowly shook her head. "I think you have the wrong person. My name is Helen, and I am not married." "You have lost your memory," Robert said, stepping forward. The words tumbled out, laden with desperation. "Something happened to you. You disappeared from our home in Beverly Hills. I searched for you every day. Every day, Helen. I never gave up." Helen took a step back, her expression shifting from confusion to something close to fear. "Please, don't come closer. I don't know you. Julia, where is your father?" Before the girl could respond, the front door opened and a man entered. He was tall, thin, with sunburned skin and calloused hands from hard work. He wore a mechanic's uniform stained with oil. His gaze immediately went to Robert, then to Helen, and he understood the situation instantly. "Who are you?" the man asked, his voice low but with a clear threat. "And what are you doing in my house?" "My name is Robert Miller." Robert tried to keep his voice steady. "This woman is my wife. She disappeared over a year ago. Your daughter recognized her in a poster I was distributing." The man slowly set down his tool bag, his eyes never leaving Robert. "Can I see that poster?" Robert pulled one from his folder with trembling hands and handed it over. The man took it and studied it carefully. Helen moved closer to him, and Robert noticed the gesture, the way she naturally sought protection from that man. It hurt more than any words could. "Mark," Helen said softly, touching the man's arm. "Who is this woman in the picture?" "Mark. So that was his name." The man sighed deeply, looking at Helen with a tenderness that made Robert's stomach churn. "It's you, Helen. This photo is yours." Helen took the poster from his hands. Her fingers trembled as she studied her own image. Robert could see the confusion on her face, the internal struggle trying to connect that photo with some memory that didn't exist. "I don't remember this," she whispered. "I don't remember any of this." Mark turned to Robert, and despite the tension, there was something that seemed like pain on his face too. "Look, I don't know who you are or what you want, but Lena has been through a lot. She can't just receive strangers showing up saying things that confuse her. I'm not a stranger." Robert felt his anger rising. "I am her husband. We lived together for 8 years. We have a home, a life. She has family, friends, a job she loved. How can you keep her here without investigating who she really was?" "Do you think I didn't try?" Mark stepped forward, his voice rising. "When I found her, she was alone in the rain, hurt and scared. I took her to the hospital. I gave my information, waited for someone to show up. No one came. I filed a report. Nothing. She had no documents, didn't know her full name, recognized nothing. What was I supposed to do? Leave her on the street?" Robert opened his mouth to respond, but he had no words. Technically, the man was right. He had done what any decent person would do. But still, Helen belonged to Robert. She was his wife. "Daddy," Julia tugged at Mark's sleeve. "Don't fight. The man seems nice. He just wants his wife." Mark looked at his daughter, and his expression softened. He ran a hand through his clearly divided hair. "Lena," he said gently, "do you want to talk to this man? If you don't want to, I'll ask him to leave." Helen still held the poster. She looked at Robert, really looked this time, as if she were trying to find something familiar in that face. Robert held his breath, waiting, silently pleading for her to remember. "I have dreams," Helen finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I dream of a big house, with gardens and marble stairs. I wake up crying sometimes, feeling like I lost something very important. But I don't know what it is." "It's our home," Robert said, taking another cautious step forward. "Our home in Beverly Hills. You loved the garden, spent hours tending to the roses. The stairs you see are the entrance stairs." Robert felt the weight of the Italian marble. You chose it. Helen closed her eyes as if trying to visualize. Mark watched her with concern, a hand protectively resting on her shoulder. I can prove it, Robert continued. I can bring photos, documents, anything you need. Our wedding albums. The deeds to the house in your name too, people who know you. His best friend Richard, who was the best man. At our wedding, your mother, Mrs. Smith, who lives in Santa Monica and has been desperately looking for you. My mother? Helen opened her eyes abruptly, and for the first time, Robert saw something different. In them, a spark of hope, perhaps. I have a mother. Do you? Robert felt the tears finally fall. Do you have a mother? Do you have cousins, friends? I have a whole life waiting for you, and there's me waiting every day. Silence fell over the room again. Julia approached Helen and held her hand. Mommy, are you okay? Helen looked at the girl and smiled sadly. I am, dear. I'm just confused. Mark took a deep breath. I think it's best if you leave now, he said to Robert, but his voice had lost its hardness. This is a lot to process. Helen needs time. Please, Robert pleaded. Just let me bring the proof. Tomorrow I'll bring everything I have, and then you can decide. Just don't ask me to leave and never come back. Not when I finally found her. Mark and Helen exchanged a long look. There was a silent communication between them that made Robert realize how close they had become. This would not be simple. It wouldn't just be about taking Helen back home. Tomorrow, Mark finally said. You can come back tomorrow afternoon, but only if Helen agrees. All eyes turned to Helen. She held the sign against her chest, her expression tormented. Finally, she nodded. All right, you can bring the proof. I want to understand what happened to me. Robert felt such a relief that he almost fell to his knees. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll bring everything. You'll see. You'll remember. Mark escorted Robert to the door. Before he left, the mechanic held his arm. Listen, I don't know what really happened, but Helen has become part of my family. My daughter loves her. He paused, his voice faltering. I care about her too. So if you really are who you say you are, you'll have to understand that things have changed. She has changed. Robert looked into the man's eyes and saw sincerity there. He saw love and understood that this would be much more complicated than he had imagined. I just want her to be okay, Robert said honestly. I want her to know who she really is. Mark nodded and released his arm. Until tomorrow, then. Robert stepped out into the street, his legs shaky, walked to where he had left the car and got in, closing the door. Then, alone, he let all the emotions he had held back overflow. He cried like he hadn't cried since the day Helen disappeared. But this time, the tears were of relief mixed with fear. Relief for having found her alive. Fear that she would never truly be his again. He looked back at the simple house where his wife had lived for over a year. On the second floor, he saw a curtain move. Helen was at the window watching. Their eyes met for a brief moment through the foggy glass. Then she stepped away, disappearing into the darkness of the room. Robert started the car but didn't drive away immediately. He sat there, looking at that house that held the greatest mystery of his life. How had Helen ended up there? What had happened that day? And more importantly, would she ever return to being the woman he knew? Finally, he put the car in motion. He had a lot to do. Documents to gather, photos to select, people to notify. Tomorrow would be the most important day of his life since the wedding. Tomorrow he would start bringing Helen back. Robert didn't sleep that night. As soon as he got home, he went straight to the office and began gathering everything that could prove his story. Wedding photo albums, pictures from the trips they took together, everyday photos, the marriage certificate, house documents, joint bank statements. He meticulously sorted everything, organizing it chronologically so it would make sense. Each photo he touched brought a memory. Here, Helen laughing in Paris, in front of the Eiffel Tower. There, the two of them on a paradise beach in the Caribbean, her wearing that blue bikini he loved so much. Another photo showed Helen on the porch of the mansion, holding a cup of coffee and looking at the garden with that serene smile he adored. How could she not remember any of this? Robert picked up the marriage certificate and ran his fingers over the signatures. Her handwriting was delicate, feminine, full of flourishes. He remembered that day as if it were yesterday. Helen had been nervous when it was time to sign, her hands trembling slightly. He had held her hand, whispered that it was all okay, that they were forever, and she had laughed that musical laugh he hadn't heard in over a year and signed with confidence. Mary found him at 3 a.m., still awake, surrounded by papers and photographs spread across the table. "Mr. Robert," she said softly from the door, "did you find her?" Robert looked up, and Mary saw a mix of joy and torment in his eyes that she had never seen before. "I found her, Mary. She's alive, but she doesn't remember me. Doesn't remember anything." The housekeeper entered the room and sat in the armchair next to the table, her own tears beginning to fall. "Thank God she's alive. I prayed every day, lit candles at the church, asked Our Lady to protect her. But without memory, how is that possible? Tell me." And Robert told her about the girl who recognized Helen at the shelter, about the simple house in East Side Gardens, about the mechanic who had saved his wife, and the daughter who called her mother. He spoke about Helen's vacant look when she saw him, as if he were a complete stranger. He recounted how she seemed comfortable in that simple life, so different from the luxury they had shared. "Marissa must have seen it, Charles. The house is tiny, probably around 650 square feet at most. The sofa is old, the television must be 20 years old, and there are cracks in the walls. But Helen was there, sitting on that sofa as if it were her place, as if our mansion, our life, everything we built together had never existed." Marissa listened in silence, her hands clasped in her lap. When Robert finished, she sighed deeply. Did she seem happy? The question caught Robert off guard. "What, Mrs. Helen?" Marissa repeated. "Did she seem happy in that house?" Robert thought for a moment. She looked confused, scared, but when he looked at the girl, he saw something in her eyes. Affection, even love. And the man Charles, she sought comfort in him when she got nervous. "So she found a family," Marissa concluded softly. "She may not remember us, but she wasn't alone. That has to count for something." Robert felt a pang of jealousy and anger. "She has a family here. She has me. She has you. She has Mrs. Smith. She has friends. She has a life. She can't just trade it all for strangers." "They are no longer strangers to her, Mr. Robert," Marissa pointed out. "They are the only people she knows. You have to be patient. Mrs. Helen went through something traumatic. She will need time to process everything. What are you going to do?" "I will bring her back," Robert said with determination, but his voice faltered slightly. "I will show her the evidence. Make her remember. She has to remember, Marissa. She has to. I can't have searched for her all this time just to lose her again. And what if she doesn't want to come back?" The question hung in the air. Robert had no answer for that. He couldn't imagine a world where he found Helen but couldn't bring her home. After 423 days of relentless searching, after spending a fortune on investigators, after scouring every neighborhood in the city, he had finally found her. He couldn't accept that she would choose to stay away. "She will come back," Robert said. "More for herself than for Marissa. When she sees the evidence, when she understands who she really is, she will come back. She has to come back." Meanwhile, in the small house in East Side Gardens, Helen also couldn't sleep. She was lying in the simple bed of the room she shared with Julia, staring at the cracked ceiling. The girl was sleeping soundly beside her, her face calm and innocent. Helen carefully got up so as not to wake Julia and walked to the window. Outside, the street was dark and silent. She tried to remember, forced her mind to search for any memory of the man who had appeared, claiming to be her husband. But there was nothing, just the frustrating emptiness that had accompanied her since. She woke up in that hospital over a year ago. What she remembered was fragmented and confusing, waking up in pain, nurses talking around her, Charles by her bedside holding her hand and asking if she was okay. He had told her he found her lying in an alley, her clothes torn and muddy, bleeding from her head. He had taken her straight to the emergency room. In the days that followed, while she recovered, Charles came every day to visit her. He brought Julia, who was fascinated by the mysterious woman her father had saved. Helen couldn't even remember her own name. The doctors said she had suffered severe trauma to her head and that perhaps the memories would return with time. Or maybe not. When she was discharged, she had nowhere to go. Charles, with the kind heart that Helen would come to know well, offered for her to stay with them temporarily. Temporary became permanent when it became clear that no one was looking for her, that she had no idea who she was or where she came from. Helen had accepted the name Lena because it felt familiar when Charles suggested it. Over time, she grew accustomed to that simple life. She learned to cook Julia's favorite dishes, helped the girl with her homework, took care of the house while Charles worked long hours at the garage, and at some point, without exactly realizing when, that house became her home and those people became her family. But there was always something bothering her, the dreams. She would wake up in the middle of the night with images of places she didn't recognize. A large white house, vast gardens, the smell of roses. Sometimes she dreamed of a male face, but she couldn't see the features clearly, and always there was a sense of loss, as if an essential part of her was missing. A soft knock on the bedroom door pulled her from her thoughts. Charles entered quietly. "You can't sleep either." Helen shook her head. He approached and stood beside her at the window, keeping an appropriate distance, as he always did. Charles had never taken advantage of the situation, never tried anything inappropriate. He was a good man, and Helen was grateful for that. "Are you scared, Charles?" she asked softly. "Confused," Helen corrected, "and maybe a little hopeful. What if it's true, Charles? What if I really have a family, a mother who is looking for me?" Charles swallowed hard. She could see the pain in his profile illuminated by the dim streetlight. "Then you will find out who you are. And that's good, Lena. You deserve to know. But what about you guys?" Helen turned to him. "And Julia? She calls me mother. Charles. How can I just leave?" "Don't think about that now," Charles said, but his voice was heavy with emotion. "First, let's see what this man has to show. Then we decide. Charles." Helen lightly touched his arm, and he finally looked at her. "Thank you for everything, Thank you for saving me, for giving me a home, for treating me with such respect. No matter what happens, I will never forget this." He placed his hand over hers for a brief moment. "I would do it all over again, Helen. You brought light into our home. Julia was so sad after we lost her mother. You made her smile again." "You saved me too," Helen whispered. "I was lost, and you found me." They stood there in shared silence for a few more minutes, both knowing that everything was about to change, but not wanting to be the first to admit it. The next morning, Robert arrived early. He was nervous. He had rehearsed what he would say 100 times during the night at Sony. He carried 2 large folders filled with documents and a heavy photo album. Charles greeted him at the door, his expression serious but not hostile. "Come in. Helen is waiting in the living room." Helen was sitting on the old sofa, Julia beside her holding her hand. The girl looked at Robert with curiosity mixed with resentment. She still wasn't sure if she liked the man who threatened to take her mother away. "Good morning," Robert said, trying to sound calm despite his trembling hands. "I brought everything I promised." He sat in the chair Charles indicated and began to open the folders. Helen leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the documents. "This is our marriage certificate." Robert began showing the official paper. "We married on March 23, 2015 at St. Mary's Church in Santa Monica. You wore a white lace dress that your mother had saved from her own wedding." Helen took the document with trembling hands, looked at the official names, Robert Miller and Helen Aparecida Santos Miller. She saw her signature, that handwriting that somehow felt familiar yet strange at the same time. Robert continued showing photo after photo of the wedding, with Helen radiant in an elegant dress next to an older woman who was clearly her mother. Photos of trips, beaches, mountains, foreign cities, photos at home, Helen smiling while watering flowers in the garden, intimate photos, private moments of a happy couple. "This was taken 3 weeks before you disappeared," Robert said, showing a photo of them in a restaurant. "It was our wedding anniversary. We went to your favorite restaurant, right? The Labra Sierra." Helen studied the photo intensely, trying to feel something, any connection to that smiling woman in the arms of the man. But it was like looking at a stranger who coincidentally had her face. "And this," Robert pulled out another document. "It's the deed to our house. It's in both our names. You insisted on that. You said it was our home, not just mine." Julia squeezed Helen's hand tighter. "Mommy, are you remembering something?" Helen looked at the girl, then at Charles, who was watching everything from the door with a grim expression, and finally at Robert, who was looking at her with desperate hope. "I don't know," Helen admitted in a weak voice. "I want to remember. I'm trying, but it's like looking at someone else's life." Robert felt his heart sink, but he continued. "I also brought something that might help." He pulled out a small perfume bottle from the folder. "This was your favorite perfume. You wore it every day. Chanel No. 5. He opened the bottle, and the intense scent filled the room. Helen inhaled, and suddenly her whole body stiffened. That scent. She recognized that scent. It had been in her dreams, always present but undefined until now. "I know this scent," she whispered, her eyes wide. "I dream about it." The perfume triggered something in Helen. It wasn't complete memories, but fragments, sensations. She closed her eyes and saw flashes, a luxurious bathroom, her own hand applying the perfume to her wrist, the reflection in a large, ornate mirror. And then, as quickly as it came, it disappeared. She opened her eyes and found Robert watching her intently. "Did you remember something?" he asked, barely able to contain the hope in his voice. "Not exactly," Helen admitted, frustrated. "They are just impressions, images that don't make complete sense." Charles stepped forward. "Maybe we shouldn't force it. The doctors said her memory might come back naturally, or it could be permanent. Pressuring might make it worse." "I'm not pressuring," Robert defended, but his voice came out more aggressively than he intended. "I'm just showing the truth, the life she had, the life we had, a life she doesn't remember." Charles retorted to him now. "This is her life. This house, Julia, me, this is real for her." Robert felt anger rising. This man had his wife for over a year and was now acting as if she belonged to him. But before he could respond, Helen spoke. "Please, stop." She massaged her temples, a headache starting to form. "I need time. This is all too much. I look at these photos and know it's me, but I don't feel like I am me. Do you understand?" Robert took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. "I understand. And I'm sorry. I know this must be frightening for you." "But Helen..." He knelt in front of her, taking her hands before she could pull. "Away! I love you. I have loved you for 10 years. I spent every day of the last year searching for you. Please, give me a chance to help you remember." Helen looked at those hands holding her own, large, well-groomed, so different from Charles's calloused hands. She tried to feel something, any spark of recognition or connection, but there was nothing but confusion. "I need time," she repeated softly, withdrawing her hands. "And I need to talk to Julia and Charles alone." Robert understood he was being dismissed and reluctantly stood up. "I can leave the photos and documents for you to look at whenever you want." Helen nodded. Charles accompanied Robert to the door again. On the way, Robert turned around. "How did you find her? Just like it was?" Charles looked back at the room, where Helen was hugging Julia and then Robert. "It was a stormy night. I was coming back late from the workshop. I saw her lying in a drenched alley, hurt. There was blood on her head, and she was unconscious. I put her in the car and took her straight to the hospital. The doctor said she had hit her head hard. I filed a report with the police, gave all my information. I waited for someone to show up, but no one came." "What day was that?" Robert asked. "July 14th. "Why?" Robert felt as if he had been punched. July 14th, the day after Helen's disappearance, and she had vanished from Beverly Hills, which was not close to Eastside Gardens. How did she end up so far away? And what happened in those hours between her disappearance and when Charles found her? "Is there a problem?" Charles asked, noticing Robert's expression. That was the day after she went missing. Robert rubbed his face. "She disappeared in the early hours of the 13th. What was she doing in that area? How did she get there?" "I don't know, Charles," he admitted. "She couldn't explain. She doesn't remember anything." Before waking up in the hospital, Robert felt slowly, his mind working frantically. There was something wrong there, something that didn't fit. But for now, the important thing was that he had found Helen. The rest could be unraveled later. After Robert left, Helen stayed in the room with Charles and Julia. The girl was visibly shaken, tears silently streaming down her face. "Are you leaving?" Julia asked in a small voice. "Are you going to leave us?" Helen pulled the girl into her lap, something she hadn't done in months since Julia was already grown, but now it felt necessary. "I don't know, sweetheart. Honestly, I don't know what to do, but you are my daughter." Julia sniffled. "You live here. This is your home." Charles sat next to them on the sofa, placing his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Julia, you need to understand. Helen has another life. A life she doesn't remember, but it's real. We are a real family." Julia insisted, turning to her father. "You said she was part of our family now. You promised, and she is," Charles said, but his voice was heavy. "But things are more complicated than we thought." Julia abruptly got up from Helen's lap and ran to her room, slamming the door. Helen made a move to follow her, but Charles held her back. "Let her calm down a bit. She needs to process." Helen turned to Charles and for the first time really looked at him. She saw the sadness in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. "Are you scared?" "Too?" she realized. "I'm terrified," Charles admitted, running his hand through his hair. "Helen, I know I don't have the right to feel this way. You're not really mine. You never were. But all this time I've learned to—" He stopped, struggling with the words. "I've learned to care about you a lot, and Julia loves you like she has never loved anyone since her mother left." Helen felt the tears start to fall. "I care about you both too. This house, you too. You gave me a life when I had nothing. How can I just forget that? You—" "Won't forget, Charles," she said, gently taking his hand. "But you have the right to know who you were. You have the right to go back to your real life if you want to." "And what if I don't know what I want?" Helen questioned. "I look at those photos and see a happy woman in a comfortable life with a man who clearly loved her. But when I look at this house, at you and Julia, I see the only life I really know. How do you choose between two lives when you only remember one?" "Maybe you don't have to choose right now," Charles suggested. Maybe you need to spend some time with that man, with your real family, see if it stirs anything. The idea filled Helen with fear and, surprisingly, guilt. It felt like a betrayal to Charles and Julia to consider going back to that rich stranger, but it also felt wrong to deny her past, to deny the truth of who she was. That night, after Charles went to sleep, Helen quietly climbed up to the small attic where they kept old things. She rummaged through dusty boxes until she found what she was, looking for a worn wooden trunk. Inside was the dress, the long blue dress with white flowers. She carefully took it out, as she always did when nostalgia overwhelmed her. She didn't know why she kept that dress. She didn't know where it came from, but something about it always made her feel a deep connection. Helen held the fabric against her body and went to the cracked mirror in the corner of the attic. In the dim light of the moon coming through the small window, she looked at her reflection and suddenly had another flash of memory. She saw herself wearing that dress, twirling in front of a huge mirror in a luxurious room. She heard a male voice saying she looked beautiful. She felt pure, overwhelming happiness. And then, as always, the image dissolved. Helen hugged the dress and sat on the dusty floor of the attic, crying silently. She was torn between two worlds, two lives, two families, and didn't know how to find her place in either. Downstairs, Charles was also awake. He was in the living room looking at the photos Robert had left. Each image showed Helen radiant, clearly in love, living a life he could never provide. A life of luxury, travel, opportunities. He picked up a specific photo, Helen, in a vast garden, surrounded by roses, smiling at the camera with genuine joy. Charles would never be able to give her that. His home had a tiny backyard with dirt. He worked 12 hours a day to pay the bills. There were no dinners in fancy restaurants, no jewelry, no trips abroad. But he loved her. He had fallen in love. He fell for her unintentionally, without planning. It happened gradually in the small moments of everyday life, when she laughed at his bad jokes, when she tenderly cared for Julia, when she waited for him to come home from work with a warm meal. He knew it was selfish. He knew he should have reached out to her more actively. But he was afraid. Afraid of losing her, just as he was about to lose her now. Julia tiptoed down the stairs and found him like this, surrounded by photos, with silent tears on his face. Dad. Charles quickly wiped his eyes. He shouldn't be sleeping. He couldn't. Julia sat beside him. You're going to lose her, aren't you? Charles. He couldn't lie to his daughter. I don't know, Princess. Maybe. It's not fair, Julia murmured. She's ours. We took care of her. We love her. I know, Charles pulled her into a hug. But sometimes loving someone means letting that person go, even when it hurts. Robert spent the following days trying to give Helen space to process everything, but it was almost impossible to stay away. He returned to the East Side Gardens every day, always bringing something new. Photos, belongings of Helen, letters she had written to him during his business trips. Richard, his best friend, tried to advise him to be patient. Dude, you need to give her time. You can't show up every day expecting her to just be who she was. Memory doesn't work that way, but Robert couldn't stop. Every morning he woke up thinking of something new that could spark Helen's memories. A book she loved, a CD with her favorite songs, even the perfume she used before disappearing. He bought everything again and brought it to her, hopeful. Each visit was tense. Helen received him politely, studied what he brought, but still didn't remember. And with each visit, Robert noticed more clearly the dynamics of that house. How Julia clung to Helen, how Charles looked at her when he thought no one was watching, how Helen naturally moved around the house with familiarity and comfort. It was like watching his wife live a parallel life, a life where he didn't exist. Robert saw how Helen smiled while making morning coffee in that tiny kitchen, how she laughed at Julia's simple jokes, how her eyes lit up when Charles came home from work. She had never looked at him like that, not since he found her. With him there was politeness and even some affection, but there wasn't that natural ease she had with Charles and Julia. One Saturday afternoon, Robert had an idea. "Helen," he said during one of his visits, "how about going with me to our house to see the place where we lived? Maybe that will help." Helen hesitated, looking at Charles, who was watching from the kitchen. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "Please," Robert insisted. "Just a visit. If you feel uncomfortable, I'll bring you back immediately. But you need to see. You need to be there. Maybe being in the places where we lived together will bring the memories back. The doctors say familiar environments can help in cases of amnesia." Charles approached, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "I think you should go, Helen," he said, though the words clearly hurt him. "You need to know everything before making any decisions. You can't base your life on fear of the unknown." Julia appeared at the door, overhearing the conversation. "Are you going out, Mommy? Are you going to see his house?" "Just for a few hours, dear." Helen knelt to be at the girl's height. "I'll be back soon, I promise. But what? If you don't come back?" Julia asked, tears welling in her eyes. "What if you stay there and forget about us? I will never forget you." Helen hugged her tightly. "You are real to me. No matter what I discover about my past, you will always be important." Helen finally agreed to go. On the way to Beverly Hills, sitting in the passenger seat of Robert's luxury car, she felt completely out of place. The fine leather seatbelt, the smell of the new car, the digital dashboard technology displaying maps and information. Everything was strange compared to the old noisy car Charles drove, where the radio crackled and the air conditioning didn't work properly. Robert tried to make casual conversation, telling stories about them, about the life they had. Helen listened, but it was like hearing about characters in a book, not about herself. When they arrived at the gated community, the security guard greeted Robert and looked curiously at Helen. "Mrs. Helen, it's great to see you back." Helen smiled politely, not knowing what to say. Robert showed his ID, and they entered. The community was impressive. Wide, tree-lined streets, huge, imposing houses, imported cars in every garage. It was a world completely different from the simple neighborhood where she lived. "This is our house," Robert said proudly and nervously, stopping in front of a 2-story white mansion with perfectly manicured gardens. Helen got out of the car and stood still, staring. It was exactly like her dreams. The white house, the marble stairs, the vast garden. She walked slowly to the entrance, her hands trembling. Robert opened the door and let her enter first. The interior was stunning. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, designer furniture, artwork on the walls, everything screamed wealth and good taste. "You decorated everything?" Robert explained, following her as she walked through the house in shock. "Every painting, every piece of furniture, every detail was chosen by you. You have a natural talent for design." Helen touched the surfaces, felt the textures, trying to awaken some memory. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, and Robert guided her to the master bedroom. This was our room. It was huge, bigger than Charles's entire house, a king-size bed with fine linen sheets, a closet that was practically a separate room, a marble bathroom with a hot tub. There were photos of them everywhere, captured moments of happiness. Helen walked to the vanity. She saw expensive beauty products, perfumes, jewelry. She picked up a hairbrush and saw brown strands still stuck in the bristles, remnants from over a year ago. In the closet, she found designer clothes, expensive shoes, handbags from brands she never dreamed of having in her life. She picked up a dress and held it against her body, looking at herself in the enormous mirror. Another flash of memory. She saw herself exactly there in that mirror, wearing that dress, Robert behind her, adjusting a necklace around her neck. She felt dizzy and leaned against the mirror. "Are you okay?" Robert rushed to support her. "I saw myself here," Helen whispered, "wearing this dress. You were behind me, putting something around my neck." "A pearl necklace," Robert said excitedly. "On your 30th birthday, you're starting to remember." But Helen shook her head. "They're just flashes, like loose photographs, without context." Robert led her to the garden. The roses were a bit wild. No one had taken care of them properly since Helen left. She knelt beside a flower bed, her hands instinctively reaching for a red rose. "These were your favorites," Robert said softly. "You used to spend hours here. You said tending to the plants calmed you." Helen delicately touched the petals, and another memory surfaced. She was there with gardening gloves planting a new rose bush. Robert watching her from the porch with a smile. She was happy, so happy. "I was happy here," Helen realized out loud. "In the photos, in the memories I'm having, I was genuinely happy. We were happy." Robert corrected her, kneeling beside her. "Very happy, Helen. And we can be again, if you come back, if you give me a chance." Helen looked at him. Really, looked. She saw love in his eyes, desperation, hope. He was handsome, successful, clearly loved her deeply. Any woman would dream of that, but she felt nothing. She looked at that face and saw a kind stranger. "Robert, I don't know how to be that person," she admitted, tears starting to fall. "I look at all this, and it's beautiful, it's perfect, but it's not mine. It doesn't feel like mine, but it's yours." "Helen," Robert insisted, taking her hands, "all of this is yours, and I am yours. Please stay. Live here for a while. Try to get used. Into it again. The memories will come back." "And Julia?" Helen asked. "And Charles? They are my family now, Robert. The only family I know." "You can still see them," Robert proposed quickly. "I can take you to visit. Or they can come here, but you need to be in your true home with your true family. Your mother is desperate to see you. She cries every day, Helen." The mention of her mother struck something in Helen. She had a mother, a real mother, who had carried her, raised her, loved her. And that woman had been suffering for over a year, not knowing where her daughter was. "Can I meet her?" Helen asked timidly. Robert smiled for the first time in days. "Of course, she can come tomorrow. She will be so happy." That night, when Robert took Helen back to Eastside Gardens, she was different, thoughtful, distant. Julia noticed immediately. "Did you like his house?" the girl asked, trying to hide the fear in her voice. "It was beautiful," Helen admitted, "and big, very big." "Bigger than our house?" "Much bigger." Julia bit her lip. "Are you going to live there?" Helen pulled the girl into her arms. "I don't know, dear. Everything is so confusing." Charles appeared at the door. "Julia, time for your bath. Go." Julia reluctantly left, leaving Helen and Charles alone. He sat beside her on the old sofa. "How was it?" "Confusing," Helen answered honestly. "The house is exactly like my dreams. I saw some things that triggered memories, or at least something like memories." "Are you remembering him?" "Not him specifically," Helen admitted, "but the places, some situations. It's like I'm watching scenes from a movie where I'm the actress, but I don't remember filming." Charles nodded, processing. "And what do you want to do?" Helen turned to him. "He wants me to move there. He says staying in the house might help the memories come back. And he wants me to meet my mother." "Your real mother?" Charles said, his voice heavy. "Yes." Helen took his hand. "Charles, I don't know what to do. I feel like I owe it to him and my family to try, but I feel like I'm betraying you all." "You're not betraying anyone," Charles squeezed her hand. "You're trying to figure out who you are, and that's completely fair. But Julia will understand eventually." Charles took a deep breath. We both will, because we love you and want what's best for you, even if what's best isn't staying here with us. Helen leaned in and rested her head on his shoulder, something she had never done before. Charles tensed for a moment, then relaxed and wrapped his arm around her. "You're a good man, Charles," Helen whispered. "So good. I don't know what I would have become without you." "I don't know what would become of me and Julia without you," Charles replied. "You brought hope to this house, and that's something no one can take away." They stayed like that for a long moment, both knowing that everything was about to change, but allowing themselves this last moment of peace before the storm that was coming. Mrs. Smith arrived the next day, brought by Robert. She was an elegant lady with grey hair, dressed simply but with class. When she entered the East Side Gardens and saw Helen, her legs gave way. Robert had to support her. "My daughter," Mrs. Smith whispered, tears streaming down her face. "My girl." Helen stood up from the sofa, her heart racing, looking at the woman, who was supposedly her mother, and trying to feel something beyond confusion. Mrs. Smith took trembling steps toward her, hands outstretched. "Can I hug you?" the lady asked, her voice choked. "Please, please, let me hug you, Helen." She felt unable to refuse. Mrs. Smith enveloped her in a tight embrace, sobbing on her daughter's shoulder. "I thought I had lost you. I thought I would never see you again." Helen stood still, her arms around the strange woman, feeling terribly inadequate. She should feel something. She should recognize her mother's embrace, but there was nothing but pity for the pain of that lady. Mrs. Smith finally pulled away, holding Helen's face between her hands. "Let me look at you. You're thinner, and your hair is different, but it's you. It's my Helen." "I'm sorry," Helen said softly. "I don't remember you." Mrs. Smith's eyes filled with more tears, but she forced a smile. "The doctors said this could happen, but it's okay. We will make you remember. I will tell you everything about your childhood, about us." Mrs. Smith spent the entire afternoon recounting stories about Helen as a child, mischievous and curious, about her father who had passed away 10 years ago from heart problems, about summers in Santa Monica, about Helen's first boyfriend, about her graduation. Helen listened attentively, trying to see herself in those stories, but it was like learning about a completely different person. Mrs. Smith showed old photos, family albums that Robert had brought. Baby Helen, teenage Helen, adult Helen. Julia watched everything from a distance, silent and resentful. When Mrs. Smith mentioned how Helen always wanted to have children, the girl couldn't take it anymore and ran to her room. Helen considered following her, but Mrs. Smith held her back. "Who is that? Child?" "It's complicated," Helen began. "Does she live here?" Mrs. Smith asked, confused. "With you?" Robert intervened, explaining the situation. How Charles had found Helen, how she had lived with him and Julia for over a year, how the girl had seen him as a father. Mrs. Smith was shocked. "My God!" She looked at Helen with concern. "You've been living with a stranger this whole time." "He saved me," Helen defended, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I had no one and didn't know who I was. Charles gave me a home, took care of me, treated me with respect. He is a good man." Mrs. Smith exchanged a worried glance with Robert. "Helen, dear, you need to understand. You have a family, you have a home. You can't keep living here with people you don't know." "But I don't know you either," Helen pointed out, frustration finally overflowing. "You are as strange to me as Charles and Julia are." "Actually, no. They are less strange because at least I remember the last year with them." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Mrs. Smith looked as if she had been slapped. Robert stared at the floor, clearly hurt. "Helen, dear," Mrs. Smith tried again, more gently. This time I understand that you're confused, but you can't stay here. Please come live with me or with Robert. You need to be with your real family while you recover." "And abandon Julia?" Helen questioned. "She's a child. She calls me Mom. How can I just leave?" Charles had heard everything from the kitchen. He entered the room with Julia holding tightly to his hand. The girl had red eyes from crying. "Mrs. Smith, with all due respect," Charles said calmly, "Helen can do whatever she wants, but I won't let anyone pressure her to leave if she doesn't want to." "No one is pressuring," Robert stood up. "We're just trying to make her understand that she belongs somewhere else." "She belongs where she feels comfortable," Charles retorted. "And if it's here, then it's here." The two men stared at each other, palpable tension in the air. Helen stood up, placing herself between them. "Please stop." She looked from one to the other, then to Mrs. Smith. "I need time. I can't just decide my whole life in a few days." "How much time do you need?" Robert asked, trying not to sound desperate. "I don't know. Weeks, months." Helen rubbed her temples. "Maybe if I spend some time at the mansion, some time here, the memories will come back naturally, but I can't be forced to choose right now." Mrs. Smith sighed deeply, wiping her tears. "All right, my daughter. We will do it your way, but please promise me you will visit. I want to spend time with you. I want my daughter back." The desperation in Mrs. Smith's voice hit Helen hard. She nodded. "I promise. I will visit you and I will try to remember. I swear I will try." In the days that followed, Helen created a strange routine. She spent some days at the mansion in Beverly Hills, trying to get used to that life, and then returned to Charles's house in East Side Gardens. It was like living two parallel lives. At the mansion, Mrs. Smith visited her daily, bringing albums, telling stories, desperately trying to awaken her daughter's memories. Robert was attentive and patient, but Helen saw the growing frustration in his eyes every time she looked at him without recognition. Marissa, the housekeeper, was emotional to see her again. "Mrs. Helen, thank God you are well." She hugged Helen tightly. "We missed you so much." Helen liked Marissa. The woman was kind and didn't pressure her, just treated her with maternal care. But still, everything in the mansion felt strange. The spaces were too big, too quiet. Helen found herself missing the joyful chaos of Charles's house, Julia's laughter, the sound of the old television. One night while at the mansion, Helen had a dream more vivid than usual. She dreamed she was in that happy house, decorating a nursery. There was a white crib, soft yellow painted walls, stuffed animals. In the dream, Robert was with her, his hands on her round belly. Helen woke up startled, her hands instinctively going to her stomach, but there was nothing there. No baby. She looked around the dark room and saw Robert sleeping on the sofa in the room. He had insisted on sleeping there, respecting her space, but wanting to be close. Helen stood up and walked down the hallway. She walked through the empty rooms until she found one that was closed. She opened the door slowly and turned on the light. It was a nursery, just like in her dream. A white crib, yellow, walls, stuffed animals carefully arranged, but it was covered in dust, clearly unused for a long time. Helen entered, touching each item. There were tiny clothes in the closet, diapers still packaged, children's books on the small shelf. Her heart began to race. She and Robert had tried to have a baby. Robert appeared in the doorway, awakened by the noise. "You remembered?" he said softly. "That wasn't a question." "Did I dream of this room?" Helen replied. "We were decorating. I was pregnant." Robert entered the room, raw emotion on his face. "You got pregnant 3 months before you disappeared. We were so happy, but you lost the baby at 8 weeks. It was devastating for both of us, but especially for you." Helen felt tears streaming down her face, though she didn't know exactly why she was crying. She didn't remember the baby, didn't recall the pregnancy or the loss, but something in her heart ached deeply. After that, you changed. Robert continued to approach. You became quieter, more distant. We started going to therapy together. You were getting better, becoming yourself again, and then you disappeared. Do you think I hesitated? Do you think I left on purpose, that I couldn't handle the pain and just ran away? No, Robert said firmly. I know you, Helen. You wouldn't do that. Something happened to you, something bad. And when we find out what it was, we'll deal with it together. But Helen wasn't so sure. What if she had run away? What if she couldn't cope with the loss of the baby and just left home aimlessly, ending up in an accident and losing her memory? It would be her fault. Then all of Robert's suffering, his mother's, would have been because of her weakness. She left the nursery and returned to the master bedroom, leaving Robert behind. She lay on the huge bed and hugged the pillow, questioning every decision she had made in the past few days. Was she doing the right thing? Should she just accept this life and forget the other? But then she thought of Julia, the girl's smile, the way her eyes sparkled when she was happy. She thought of Charles, his unwavering kindness, how he made her feel safe without ever asking for anything in return. And she realized it wasn't a simple choice between right and wrong. It was a choice between two kinds of love, two families, two lives, both real, both important. Weeks turned into a month, and Helen remained torn between the two worlds. During the day when she was at the mansion, Robert took her to places they used to frequent together. The Italian restaurant where they had their first date, the art gallery where she worked, the beach in Santa Monica where he proposed. Each place sparked small fragments, a sense of familiarity here, a déjà vu there, but nothing concrete, nothing that truly made her remember. It was frustrating for both of them. Robert could see the disappointment on his own face every time Helen looked at a significant place and felt nothing but emptiness. One afternoon, he took her to the botanical garden. "We used to come here every Sunday," Robert explained, as they walked along the tree-lined paths. "You said it was your favorite place in Los Angeles, that the peace here helped you forget the stress of the week." Helen looked around at the lush plants, the tranquil lake, the people walking calmly. It was beautiful, no doubt, but it stirred nothing within her. "It's pretty," she said, not wanting to hurt him with the truth that she didn't remember. Robert stopped walking and turned to her. "Helen, be honest with me. When you're here in these places that were ours, do you feel anything at all?" Helen wanted to lie, wanted to say yes, that she felt something familiar, something special, but she couldn't. "I feel they're beautiful places. I feel the person I was loved them. But I don't feel they're mine. It's like visiting someone else's house." Richard, Robert's best friend and best man at their wedding, came to visit her one afternoon. He was a friendly man with an easy laugh, and Helen found herself liking him immediately. "Helen, my God, are you okay?" Richard hugged her enthusiastically. "When Robert said he found you, I couldn't believe it. I thought I had lost my best friend." "Best friend?" Helen repeated, surprised. "Of course." Richard sat on the sofa, Robert beside him. "We were inseparable. You, me, and Robert. The trouble trio. That's what they called us in college." Richard spent hours telling stories about when the three of them met in college, about parties, trips, embarrassing moments, and hilarious adventures. Helen laughed at the stories, but they were courtesy laughs, not genuine recognition. "Do you remember that time?" Richard continued excitedly, "when we decided to camp on the beach and it rained all night. You got sick, and Robert stayed up all night taking care of you. That's when I knew he was crazy about you." Robert smiled at the memory, his eyes fixed on Helen. She averted her gaze, uncomfortable with the intensity of his emotion. After Richard left, Robert found Helen in the garden. She was sitting on the bench under the oak tree, her eyes lost on the horizon. "Can I sit?" he asked. "Is it your house?" "Our house," Robert corrected, sitting beside her, but keeping a respectful distance. "Helen, we need to talk." She turned to him, waiting. "It's been over a month," Robert began, choosing his words carefully. "You've been here, getting to know your family, seeing your life, but you're still living there with them. I need to know, do you really intend to come back?" Helen sighed deeply. "Robert, I don't know. Every time I come here, I see how much you love me, I see the life we had, but I can't feel anything. It's like trying to force a feeling that doesn't exist but could exist again," Robert insisted, moving closer. "If you give yourself a chance, if you really try to live this life, the feelings will come back, I'm sure of it." "And what if they don't come back?" Helen asked. "What if I stay here and never fall in love with you again? It wouldn't be fair to you to live with someone who sees you as a stranger." "I accept that risk," Robert said without hesitation. "I'd rather have you here without memories than not have you at all." "But it's not just about us," Helen pointed out. "There's Julia. She's a child, Robert. A child who loves me and whom I love. How can I abandon her?" "You don't have to abandon her," Robert argued. "We can have visits. I can hire tutors for her, ensure she gets a good education. I can help the family in ways that will make a real difference in their lives. Don't you understand?" Helen shook her head. "It's not about money or education. It's about being present. It's about being the person she looks for when she's scared, who helps her with homework, who brushes her hair every morning. I can't buy that role, Robert. I can only live it." Robert fell silent, processing. He finally asked what he had been avoiding for weeks. "Have you fallen in love with him? With Charles?" Helen took a moment to respond. "I don't know if it's romantic love, but there is something. He makes me feel safe. He treats me kindly, expecting nothing in return. And there's an ease between us that I can't feel here." The words cut Robert deeply, but he maintained his composure. "So you prefer a life of simplicity with them over a life of comfort with me?" "It's not about comfort or simplicity," Helen tried to explain. "It's about where I feel like myself when I'm there. I don't have to force memories. I don't have to pressure myself to be someone I'm not. I just exist." "But you are someone," Robert insisted, his voice rising. "You are Helen Miller. You're my wife, Mrs. Smith's daughter, an art graduate. You worked for years at the Perspective Gallery. That doesn't just disappear because you lost your memory. But to me it has disappeared," Helen replied. "To me I am Lena, the woman who takes care of Julia, who helps Charles, who lives in a simple house in East Side Gardens. That's the person I know, not the wealthy woman in the photos." "So that's it." Robert stood up abruptly. "You're going to choose them. You're going to throw away 8 years of marriage, an entire family that loves you, a lifetime for people you've known for just over a year. It's not throwing it away." Helen stood up too. "It's choosing the life I feel is mine." "Robert, I'm not doing this to hurt you, but I can't live a lie. I can't pretend to have feelings I don't have." Robert ran his hands over his face, trying to control his emotions. "You're making a mistake. That man, he can't give you anything. He has no resources, no education. He works 12 hours a day for minimum wage. What will happen when you need something and he can't provide? He has already given me what I needed most," Helen said softly. "He gave me a home when I had nothing. He gave me dignity, respect, and unconditional love. That is worth more than any mansion or bank account." Robert looked at her with a mix of pain and anger. "Fine, if that's what you want. But don't come looking for me when you realize you've made a mistake. Don't come crying when the reality of living in poverty hits." He strode out of the garden, leaving Helen alone under the oak tree. She sat back down on the bench, tears finally falling. She didn't want to hurt Robert. She didn't want to cause pain to anyone, but she also couldn't continue living in that uncertainty, torn between two worlds. That night, Helen returned to Charles's house. Julia ran into her arms as soon as she entered. "You took so long," the girl complained. "I thought you weren't coming back. I always come back." Helen hugged her tightly. "Always." Charles was in the kitchen preparing a simple dinner. Spaghetti with marinara sauce. Nothing compared to the gourmet meals Marissa prepared at the mansion. But Helen found she preferred it this way. During dinner, Julia excitedly talked about school, about a test she did well on, about a new friend she made. Helen listened attentively, asked questions, genuinely interested. This was her place, she realized, not in the huge, silent halls of the mansion, but at this small, noisy table. After Julia went to bed, Charles and Helen stayed in the living room. The old television showed a soap opera, but neither of them was paying attention. "How was today?" Charles asked. "Difficult," Helen admitted. "Robert is getting impatient. He wants me to make a decision." "And have you made one?" Helen looked at him, really looked. She saw the marks of fatigue on his face, the calloused hands resting in his lap, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. It wasn't just gratitude she felt, it was more. "I think so," she said softly. Charles held his breath. "And I want to stay here with you and Julia, if you want me." Charles's face lit up in a way Helen had never seen. "Really? Are you sure? Because there's a lot at stake. You're giving up a lifetime." "I'm choosing the life I want," Helen corrected. "The life that makes me happy. I don't remember my past, Charles. Maybe I'll never remember. But I know my present, and I want you and Julia to be my future." Charles moved closer, hesitantly. "Can I?" He paused. "Can I hug you?" Helen felt it, and for the first time, she allowed the hug to last more than a polite moment. She allowed herself to feel his warmth, the comfort, the security, and for the first time since she woke up in that hospital over a year ago, she felt. Helen was at home. But they didn't know that her decision would trigger a series of events that would test everyone involved in ways they never imagined. The news of Helen's decision spread quickly. Mrs. Smith was devastated. She went to the house in Eastside Gardens, determined to make her daughter change her mind. "Helen, you can't be serious," Mrs. Smith said, her voice trembling. "You're going to abandon your family, your life, everything you've built for people you barely know?" "Mom." Helen used the word for the first time, and Mrs. Smith flinched at hearing it. "I know them better than I know you. To me, this is my family." "Because you've lost your memory?" Mrs. Smith argued. "But that doesn't change who you really are. It doesn't change that you are my daughter, who grew up in Santa Monica, graduated from university, and married Robert. I know all of that," Helen said calmly. "I read about this woman in the documents, saw the photos, heard the stories, but I don't recognize myself in her. I'm sorry, Mom, but I need to live the life I know, not the one I'm told I should know." "And Julia?" Mrs. Smith changed tactics. "Do you think it's fair to let that child get attached to you as a mother when you're not? When she's old enough to understand that you'll never really be hers?" "Her mother has been gone for 3 years," Helen replied. "She has every right to have a mother." "Figure, and I have every right to love her. But at what cost?" Mrs. Smith asked, tears starting to fall. "Your marriage, your real family, me, Helen. You're abandoning me again. I don't know if I'll survive losing you twice." The words hit Helen hard. She didn't want to hurt her mother, but she also couldn't live a life she didn't feel was hers just to make others happy. "I will visit her," Helen promised. "I'm not disappearing. I'm just choosing where to live. It's not the same thing," Mrs. Smith whispered. "But I see you've already decided. I hope you don't regret it, my daughter. I truly hope you don't regret it." Robert, for his part, did not accept the decision with such resignation. He hired a lawyer to explore his legal options. Technically, they were still married. The house was in both their names. There were shared assets. The lawyer, Dr. Johnson, was a middle-aged man, efficient and straightforward. "Mr. Miller," he said during the meeting, "the situation is complicated. Your wife has suffered amnesia, but she is legally competent. We cannot force her to come back." "But she's not thinking straight," Robert argued. "She's confused, vulnerable. That man might be taking advantage of her." "Is there any evidence of that?" the lawyer asked. "Did he ask for money? Make threats? Did he manipulate her in any way?" Robert had to admit that he didn't. Charles had never asked for anything. In fact, he had refused when Robert offered money as a thank you for taking care of Helen. "So, legally, there's not much we can do," Dr. Johnson explained. "She is making a conscious choice. We can request a psychological evaluation, but I doubt it will lead to anything, unless you want to file for divorce." "Divorce?" Robert went pale. "No, never." "Then you'll have to accept the situation and work with it as best as you can," the lawyer advised. "Maybe over time she'll change," but Robert didn't want to wait. He returned to Charles's house one last time, determined to make Helen see reason. "I need to talk to her," Robert said when Charles opened the door alone. Charles hesitated, but Helen appeared behind him. "Is everything okay, Charles? Can I talk to him?" They went to the small backyard. Julia watched from the window, worried. "Helen," Robert began, trying to stay calm. "I know you're confused and that I'm being impatient, but you need to understand what you're doing. It's not just about us. It's about your mother, your friends, your career. The gallery is waiting for you. Your boss, Mark, asks about you every day." "I don't remember the gallery," Helen said. "I don't remember Mark. How am I supposed to work in a place that means nothing to me?" "But it will mean something," Robert insisted. "Once you come back, see the works, talk to the artists, everything will make sense again." "Or will it?" Helen retorted. "Robert, you have to stop living in the hope that I'll wake up one day and be exactly who I was before. That may never happen." "Then let's create new memories." Robert stepped closer, taking her hands. "We can start over as a new couple. You don't need to remember the past." "Are we going to build a future with you living in a mansion and me feeling out of place all the time?" Helen asked. "Robert, when I'm there, I'm counting the minutes to come back here. That's not normal in a marriage." "Why aren't you trying?" Robert lost his patience. "You're sabotaging yourself. Because it's easier to stay here, where no one expects anything from you, than to face your real life." "My real life?" Helen stepped back, her own anger rising. "My real life is here. It's with Julia asking for help with homework, with Charles coming home tired from work, but always finding time to talk over simple dinners and old television and tight bills. That's real to me. Your mansion, your business dinners, your expensive art. That's not real. It's a fairy tale that doesn't belong to me." "It does belong to you," Robert practically shouted. "It's yours. All of it is yours. I fought for you. I searched for you every day. I never gave up. And now you just throw it all away. Why? For a poor mechanic who can barely pay his bills." "Don't talk about him like that," Helen said coldly. "Charles is more of a man than you'll ever be. He doesn't need money or status to have worth. He has character, kindness, humility, things that money can't buy." Robert stood there, speechless. Helen felt a shock, as if she had been slapped. "You are in love with him." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Helen didn't deny it. "I'm starting to fall for him," she admitted. "I didn't plan it, I didn't want it, but it happened, and I won't apologize for it." "Are you married to me?" Robert almost shouted. "That doesn't mean anything to you. It means that at some point in the past, a woman who is no longer me chose you," Helen said. "But that woman doesn't exist anymore, Robert. The woman I am now is choosing something else." Robert looked at her for a long moment, and Helen saw something break inside him, all the love, the hope, all the determination he had held on to for over a year began to crumble. "Fine," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "If that's what you want, but know that I will always love you, Helen. And if you ever change your mind, I will always be waiting. I will be waiting." He turned to leave, but Helen called out to him, "Robert, wait." He stopped but didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," she said sincerely. "I'm sorry for not being who you need me to be. You deserve to be happy. You deserve someone who loves you the way. You deserve to be loved. And I can't be that person." Robert nodded slowly, still with his back to her. "Take care, Helen, and tell Julia I hope she is very happy." Then he left, and Helen felt a deep pain in her chest. It wasn't the pain of losing a love, but the pain of knowing she had hurt someone deeply. Robert didn't deserve that. He had been patient, understanding, loving, but sometimes love just isn't enough. Charles found her still in the yard, staring at the gate through which Robert had exited. "Are you okay?" Helen turned to him, tears in her eyes. "I did the right thing. Only you can answer that," Charles said, stepping closer. "But if you're wondering, maybe you're still not sure." "I'm sure I don't want that life," Helen clarified. "But I'm not sure if it's fair to him, to my mother, to everyone who has loved me. It feels selfish. Sometimes we need to be selfish to be happy." Charles placed his hands on her shoulders. "And your happiness matters too, Helen. You can't live to please others." Julia appeared at the back door. "Mommy, he's gone. Are you going to stay?" Helen looked at the girl, at her anxious and hopeful face, and felt something solidify inside her. "I will stay, dear. I will stay." Julia ran and threw herself into Helen's arms, crying with relief. "I love you so much, Mommy, so much." "I love you too," Helen whispered, and for the first time she didn't feel guilty saying it. That night, after Julia fell asleep, Charles and Helen talked late into the night. He told her about his wife, about how it had been to lose her, about how Julia had suffered. He spoke of financial struggles, of working, 2 jobs to pay the bills, of dreams he had to abandon. Helen in turn spoke of her fears, fear of never regaining her memories, fear of making a mistake, fear that Charles and Julia would one day realize she wasn't enough. "You are more than enough," Charles said, taking her hand for the first time in a romantic way, not just comforting. "Since you arrived, you've brought light to this house. You've brought hope. And if you want to know the truth, I've fallen for you. Almost immediately I fought against it because I thought it would be wrong, that you belonged somewhere else. But now that you are choosing to stay, I won't fight it anymore." Helen looked at those hands, holding hers, so different from Robert's hands, but making her feel more than she had ever felt in the mansion. She leaned in and kissed Charles for the first time. The following weeks were the happiest Helen could remember. She, Charles, and Julia formed a true family. Charles formalized the situation, telling the neighbors that Helen was his partner. Julia was radiant, finally having the mother she had always wanted. The small house was always filled with life, laughter, and love. Helen found work at a small flower shop in the neighborhood. The owner, Mr. Wilson, was a kind gentleman who didn't ask questions about her past. He needed help, and she needed purpose. It was perfect. She discovered she had a talent for floral arrangements. Her hands seemed to instinctively know how to combine colors and textures. Her arrangements began to gain fame in the neighborhood. People came specifically asking for Helen to make their wedding bouquets, their birthday arrangements. Helen felt genuine pride in her work, something she hadn't felt when thinking about the expensive art gallery where she supposedly worked before. There, in the simple flower shop, with her hands dirty from soil and the scent of flowers in the air, she felt useful and fulfilled. Charles began coming home from work to find Helen preparing dinner, Julia doing homework at the small kitchen table, everything tidy and cozy. It was everything he had ever wanted, a complete family again. Sometimes he would stop at the door just to watch the scene, imprinting it in his memory, afraid that one day he would wake up and discover it was all a dream. One afternoon, while working on a bouquet of roses, Helen had a sudden and overwhelming memory. She saw herself in a vast garden, pruning rose bushes, completely absorbed in her work. But this time, the memory continued. She heard a voice. "Helen, dear, you've been out here for hours. Come take a break." It was Robert, and in the memory, she turned and smiled at him with so much love that Helen, in the present, felt a tightness in her chest. That woman from the past loved that man deeply. "Helen, are you okay?" Mr. Wilson asked, concerned. "You look pale." Helen dropped the flowers, her hands trembling. "I am. I just need a moment." She stepped out to the back of the flower shop and sat down. An old crate. Memories kept flooding back, one after another, like a dam that finally broke. She remembered the wedding, the honeymoon in Paris, the lazy mornings in bed with Robert, the nights watching movies together. She recalled how he made her laugh, how he supported her projects, how he insisted on having a special date every Friday. And then came the memory of the pregnancy, the overwhelming joy of seeing the positive test, hugging Robert and crying tears of happiness, decorating the baby's room together, choosing names, making plans. And then the unbearable pain. When the doctor said there were no more heartbeats, Helen doubled over, sobbing. These were not tears for the loss of the baby that had happened over 2 years ago. They were tears for the realization that she had loved Robert deeply and completely and had thrown it all away. More memories came. She remembered the therapy after the loss, how she had become depressed, how Robert had been patient and loving. She recalled finally starting to feel better, beginning to smile again, rebuilding her life, and then the last memory, the night before she disappeared. They had had a discussion, not a serious fight, but a discussion about having another child. Robert thought it was still too soon, that she needed more time to heal. Helen insisted she was ready, that she needed to try again. She had left the house angry, driving aimlessly through the city, and then Helen forced her mind to remember what came next. Nebulous images began to surface. Heavy rain, a car coming from the opposite direction, bright lights, the sound of brakes. Then nothing. An accident. She had crashed. Someone had hit her and she had hit her head. Disoriented and confused, she had gotten out of the car and started walking. She didn't remember where she was going, only that she needed to get away from there. Hours later, Charles found her. Helen wiped her tears and went back into the flower shop. "Mr. Johnson, I need to leave early today. It's urgent." "Of course, dear. Is everything all right?" "It will be, Mr. Johnson," she replied, unsure if it was true. She went straight home and found Charles in the makeshift workshop in the backyard, working on an old engine. He looked at her and immediately sensed something had changed. "What happened?" "I remembered," Helen said simply. "Everything. My marriage, my life, the accident, everything." Charles dropped the tool. "You remember?" Helen nodded, tears streaming down her face again. "I loved him, Charles. I really loved Robert. We had a beautiful life together, and I threw it all away." Charles wiped his hands on a rag and stepped closer. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Helen admitted, "because even though I remember that love, it's not what I feel now. When I think of Robert, I see the memories of who I was, but I don't feel what that woman felt. It's like watching a movie of someone else." "But now you know the truth," Charles said. "You know you have a life there, a husband who loves you, a family. How will you live knowing that?" Helen looked at him, at the man who had become so important to her. "How will I live knowing I abandoned you and Julia?" Maybe it doesn't have to be one or the other, Charles suggested, though the words clearly hurt him. Maybe you need to try your other life again. Now that you remember, it could be different. I don't want to lose you, Helen whispered. And we don't want to lose you, Charles took her hands. But we also don't want to be the reason you live with regret. Maybe you need to give that life a real chance, to truly try. And if it doesn't work, we'll be here. Are you sending me away? I'm setting you free. Charles wiped away a solitary tear falling down his face. Because I love you enough to want your happiness, even if it's not with me. That night, Helen told everything to Julia. The girl listened in silence, her hands gripping Helen's tighter and tighter. Are you leaving? Julia asked in a small voice. Maybe I need to try, Helen admitted. Now that I remember who I was, I can't just ignore it. But Julia, look at me. She lifted the girl's chin. No matter where I am, you will always be my daughter. In my heart, you are mine. But you won't live here, Julia cried. You won't be here every morning. You won't help me with homework. You won't put me to bed. Helen pulled her into a tight embrace. I'll visit every day if I can, or at least every week. And you can call me whenever you need. I promise I won't disappear from your life. But it's not the same, Julia sobbed. I wish you were really my mom, for real. I am for real, Helen insisted. Being a mother isn't about blood or documents, it's about love. And I love you, Julia, more than you can imagine. In the following days, Helen prepared to go back. It wasn't a decision she took lightly, but she knew Charles was right. She needed to give her other life a real chance, now that she remembered who she was. Mrs. Smith was emotional when Helen called. Are you remembering? Are you coming back? I am remembering, Helen confirmed, and I will try to come back, but you need to understand, Mom, that it won't be like before. I still feel divided. It doesn't matter, Mrs. Smith quickly replied. What matters is that you're coming back. Robert will be so happy. But when Helen called Robert, the conversation was more complicated. He was cautious, too hurt to allow himself hope. Are you remembering me, us? I am, Helen confirmed. I remember our wedding, the trips, the life we had. And Robert, she hesitated. I loved you so much. Robert caught the tense. The woman I was loved you, Helen, he tried to explain. And I want to try to feel that again. I want to give us a real chance. But it has to be. Be patient with me. I can't promise it will be like before. You can come home, Robert said, his voice heavy with emotion. Please come home. We'll figure out together how to make this work. There's one condition, Helen said. Julia, she's part of my life now. I need to keep seeing her. I need to be present in her life. If you can't accept that, it won't work. Robert fell silent for a long moment. Then he said, I accept. If it means having you back, I accept. On the day of her move, Helen felt as if she were being torn apart. She packed the few clothes she had, hugging every room of that small house that had been her refuge. Julia helped her pack, silent, with red eyes, from crying. Charles kept his distance, giving space but always nearby. When it was time to leave, Julia clung to Helen. Don't go, Mummy, please don't go. I have to go, sweetheart, Helen said, her own heart breaking. But I promise I'll come back. Charles finally approached. We'll take good care of you. You saved my life, Helen said, hugging him one last time in every possible way. So go, Charles whispered in her ear. Go live your life, but remember you'll always have a home here. Robert arrived to pick her up in his luxury car. The contrast between the two worlds had never been so obvious. Charles in his simple work clothes, Robert in his expensive suit, the small, worn-out house, the shiny imported car. Helen got into the car and looked back one last time. She saw Julia crying in Charles's arms. the house that had been her home, the simple but happy life she had built, and wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Returning to the mansion was harder than Helen had imagined. Even though she remembered everything now, the house felt strange, too big, too quiet. She walked through the vast hallways and missed the noise of Charles's old television, Julia's laughter echoing through the small house, the smell of cheap coffee that Charles made every morning. Robert did everything to make the transition smooth. He hired the art gallery team to visit her again. He tried to recreate their special Friday meetings. He brought flowers every day, bought her favorite chocolates, played her favorite music throughout the house. He even hired the chef who used to make her favorite dishes when they went out to dinner. But Helen could see the tension in his eyes, the constant fear that she would change her mind again, that one morning she would wake up and decide to go back to Charles. Mrs. Smith visited almost every day, bringing Helen's favorite dishes that she remembered from her childhood, telling more stories about her late father, showing old family photos, trying to rebuild the connection they had. Helen was grateful for her mother's effort, but she also felt suffocated. Everyone wanted too much from her, expected too much, as if she could just push a button and go back to who she was before, but that wasn't how it worked. The memories were there, now like a file she could access, but the feelings didn't come back with them. It was like knowing intellectually that she had loved someone without really feeling that love in her heart. The first week passed slowly. Helen tried to return to the routine she was supposed to have. She woke up early, had breakfast with Robert before he went to the office, spent the day reorganizing the house or in the garden, but everything felt empty. She constantly looked at the clock, calculating what Julia would be doing. At this time, she's at school. Now she's coming. Back. Now she's doing homework. On Monday of the second week, Helen couldn't take it anymore. She called Charles. "Hello?" His voice sounded surprised. "It's me. How is Julia?" "She is..." Charles hesitated. "She's suffering, Lena. She cries all night, doesn't want to eat properly. She keeps going to the room where you used to sleep and staying there." Helen closed her eyes, the physical pain in her chest. "Can I visit her today?" "Of course. You're always welcome here." Helen left a note for Robert and took a taxi to Eastside Gardens. When she arrived, Julia was sitting on the sofa, looking at a photo of the two of them that had been taken a few weeks ago. The girl looked up, and upon seeing Helen, her face lit up in a way that broke and healed Helen's heart at the same time. "Mummy!" Julia ran into her arms. "You came back just to visit, sweetheart," Helen clarified, but hugged the girl with all her strength. "But I will always come back, I promised, remember?" They spent the afternoon together. Helen helped with homework, styled Julia's hair the way she liked, cooked the special pasta that the girl adored. For a few hours, it was as if nothing had changed. Charles came home from work and found the two of them in the kitchen, laughing at something Julia had said. He stopped at the door, just watching, and Helen saw the pain and love on his face. After Julia went to play in her room, Charles and Helen talked in the living room. "How's it going?" he asked. "Difficult," Helen admitted. "The house is beautiful. Robert is attentive. My mother is always present, but I feel lonely in a way I've never felt here." "Are you trying?" Charles asked. "Am I really?" Helen sighed. "I go to the places we used to go. I read the books I liked. I try to reconnect with who I was. But it's like trying to wear clothes that no longer fit. Technically they fit, but they're not comfortable." "Maybe you need more time," Charles suggested, although his expression made it clear he hoped it wouldn't work out. Or maybe Helen started to say something, but was interrupted by Robert's arrival. He had followed Helen. When he saw the note saying she had gone to visit Julia, he became worried and decided to go get her. He entered the house without knocking. The scene he found, Helen and Charles sitting close together on the sofa, talking intimately, broke something inside him. "So this is how it is," Robert said, his voice cold. "The moment I leave for work, you run back here. I came to visit Julia." Helen stood up, as I promised I would. "It seems too intimate to be just a visit." Robert looked from Helen to Charles. "You both look very comfortable together." "Robert, don't start," Helen warned. "You said you accepted that I kept in touch with Julia. Contact." "Yes," Robert said. "But this isn't contact. This is you living two lives, having two men waiting for you. It's not fair, Helen." "Fair?" Helen felt the anger rise. "You want to talk about fair? Is it fair to expect me to completely abandon a child who sees me as a mother? A child who has already lost her mother once? She is not your daughter." Robert exploded. "Why can't you understand that? You're obsessed with that girl. And what about this man when your real family is waiting for you at home?" Charles stood up, placing himself between Helen and Robert. "I think you'd better leave. You're scaring Julia." Indeed, Julia had appeared at the bedroom door, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't tell me what to do," Robert pointed at Charles. "You're nothing but an opportunist taking advantage of my wife's situation." Charles clenched his fists but kept his voice calm. "I saved her when she was hurt and alone. I took care of her when no one knew where she was. I never asked for anything in return because I knew she had money," Robert accused. "You knew eventually someone would show up and you could gain something from it. That went too far." Helen stepped forward. "How dare you? Charles never ever asked for a dime. He works 12 hours a day to support his daughter and still found space in his heart to take me in. He is 10 times the man you are." The words hung in the air, and Helen realized too late what she had said. Robert looked at her as if he had been stabbed. "So this is it," he said, his voice hoarse. "You're not trying to make our life work. You're just waiting for an excuse to come back." "Here, Robert, I didn't mean to." Robert raised his hand. "It's clear now. You've made your choice. No matter what we say or do, you've already chosen. So go. Stay here with them, but don't come back. I can't keep living in this hope that you'll love me again when you obviously love him." Helen was paralyzed, unable to deny or confirm. Robert looked at her for one long moment, then stormed out, slamming the door. The silence that followed was heavy. Julia ran to Helen, clinging to her waist. "Are you going to stay now? You're not going back." "To him?" Helen looked at Charles, who was watching everything with a grim expression. "I messed everything up," she whispered. "You spoke the truth," Charles replied. "You can't live a lie, Lena. It wouldn't be fair to anyone. But what now?" Helen was lost. "Should I go back? Stay? I'm so confused." "I think you need to decide what you really want," Charles said. "Not what is right or wrong, not what others expect. What do you want?" Helen spent that night at Charles's house, sleeping next to Julia, who didn't let go of her for a second. In the morning, she woke up with a clarity she hadn't had in weeks. She needed to make choices. She couldn't keep being torn between two worlds, but she also couldn't just abandon one for the other. There had to be a middle ground, a way to honor both lives, both families. She called Robert. He answered on the third ring, his voice tired. "What?" "I need to talk to you. Can we chat? I don't know if there's anything more to say. Please, Robert, you owe me this conversation." A long silence. "Fine, come over." Helen went to the mansion, leaving Julia in Charles's care. Robert received her in the office, not in the living room as he usually did. It was a small but significant gesture. He was creating distance. "What do you want, Helen?" Robert asked, sitting behind the desk. "And please, be honest this time." Helen took a deep breath. "I want to be fair to everyone, including myself. I remember you. I remember what we had. And it was good. It was real. But it's not what I feel now. It's not who I am now." "So you want a divorce?" Robert concluded emotionlessly. "I don't know." Helen admitted. "I know I need to be present in Julia's life. She needs me, and I know I feel something deep for Charles, but I also don't want to hurt you more than I already have." "It's too late for that," Robert said bitterly. "I'm already hurt. So just tell me what you want so I can move on. Helen started struggling for the right words. I want to be able to love Julia without feeling guilty. I want to be able to explore what I feel for Charles without feeling like I'm betraying you. And I want you to be happy even if it's not with me. Robert looked at her for a long moment. You know what's funny? I searched for you for over a year. Every day, every moment, you were all I thought about. And now that I've found you, it's like I've lost you again. But this time in a way that there's no going back. I'm sorry, Helen whispered. I'm so sorry, Robert. I am too, he replied. I am too. Helen left the mansion in shock. The conversation with Robert had been definitive in a way she hadn't expected. He was ready to let her go. After more than a year of desperately searching, he was finally willing to give up. She returned to Eastside Gardens and spent the following days in a fog. She helped Julia with homework, cooked for Charles, did the house chores, but her mind was always elsewhere, processing, trying to understand her own feelings. Mrs. Smith showed up one afternoon, determined to have one last conversation with her daughter. Helen, we need to talk. For real this time. They sat on the small porch of the house. Julia was at school, Charles at work. It was just mother and daughter. You're going to stay here, aren't you? Mrs. Smith asked. Are you going to choose them over your family? Mom, Helen began, but Mrs. Smith raised her hand. Let me speak first. I spent the whole night thinking and realized something. I was so focused on getting my daughter, the Helen I knew, back that I didn't stop to see who you've become. And do you know what I saw? A strong, determined woman who knows what she wants. Maybe stronger than the Helen I raised. Helen felt tears welling up. Go on. You went through something terrible. You lost your memories, your identity, everything, and instead of falling apart, you built a new life. You cared for a child who wasn't yours. You fell in love again. That's not weakness, my daughter, it's strength. But I'm hurting so many people, Helen whispered. Robert, you, everyone who loved me. Sometimes hurting is inevitable, Mrs. Smith said. We can't live our lives trying not to disappoint others. I have to accept that my daughter is no longer the same, and maybe that's okay. Maybe you need to be this new Helen or Lena or whoever you decide to be. Helen hugged her mother, and for the first time, she felt a real connection. It wasn't the connection of recovered memories, but something new built in the present. But after Mrs. Smith left, Helen felt even more confused. If even her mother was accepting her choice, she still had doubts about herself. That night, while putting Julia to bed, the girl asked a question that changed everything. Mommy, are you happy here? Helen blinked in surprise. Of course I am, sweetheart. Why? Because sometimes you stare off into space with a sad face, Julia explained. And I hear you and Dad talking when you think I'm asleep. You say you feel guilty. Helen didn't know Julia had been listening. I keep thinking about the people I've hurt. Mr. Robert, Julia asked. The one who says he's your husband. Yes. Do you still love him? Helen thought carefully before answering. The person I was loved him very much. But I'm not that person anymore, sweetheart. I've changed. But you're not really happy here, Julia said with a wisdom beyond her years. Because you keep thinking you should be there. Helen realized the girl was right. She wasn't truly happy in either place because she was always thinking of the other, living with guilt, with doubt, with the feeling of betraying someone. Julia, Helen said slowly, if I had to leave, but promise that I would always be your mother, that I would always visit, that I would be present for the important things in your life, would that be enough? Julia was quiet for a long moment, then said, You need to go, don't you? Maybe, Helen admitted. I still don't know, but I need to understand something. What? If I can love two families at the same time, if I can be Robert's wife and your mother, if I can honor my past without abandoning my present. Julia took Helen's hand. You know what Dad always says, that love isn't like pizza that runs out when you share it. Love only grows when you give more. Helen smiled through her tears. Your dad is very wise. So you don't have to choose, Julia concluded. You can love everyone. You just can't live in two places at the same time. The simplicity of the child's logic hit Helen like a lightning bolt. Julia was right. The problem wasn't love. It was logistics. She was trying to physically live in two places when what she needed was to find a balance. In the following days, Helen did something she hadn't done since regaining her memories. She stopped trying to decide and just observed. She observed how she felt when she was with Julia, with Charles, with Robert, with her mother. She noticed where her heart felt lighter, where she felt more like herself, and realized something surprising. She felt most complete when she was with Julia. The girl brought pure joy to her life, but she also felt at peace when she was with Robert, especially in quiet moments when they talked about art or literature. With Charles, she felt security and comfort. With Mrs. Smith, she felt connection and history. Each person filled a different part of her. She didn't have to choose one and reject the others. She had to find a way for all of them to coexist in her life. That's when Helen had an idea. She called Robert. Can we talk? I have a proposal. Robert hesitated but agreed. They met at a neutral cafe, away from the mansion or Charles's house. Neutral territory for a difficult conversation. I'm listening, Robert said, guarded but present. I want to come back, Helen began, and saw Robert's eyes light up before adding, but with conditions. I can't be the Helen you knew. That woman no longer exists. But I can try to be a new Helen, someone who honors our past while building a different future. What are you proposing? Robert asked cautiously. I come home, to our home. I try to rebuild our life together, but Julia is part of that. She visits me regularly, or I visit her. She spends weekends with us. I continue to be present in her life. And Charles? Robert asked, his jaw tightening. Charles is Julia's father, Helen said carefully. We'll have to interact. We'll have to be cordial. But Robert, what I feel for him is gratitude and affection. What I feel for you is more complex. It's history, it's commitment, it's the possibility of renewed love. If you give me time, if you have patience, maybe we can find something new together. Why should I accept this? Robert asked. Why should I share my wife with another family? Helen held her breath. She reached her hand. Across the table, it's the only way I can honestly offer. I can't pretend that the last year didn't happen. Julia is my daughter now in heart, if not in blood. But I also can't pretend that you aren't important, that our past doesn't matter. You are my husband. I married you, made vows, and even without remembering the emotion of that day, I can honor the commitment. Robert was silent for a long time, looking at their intertwined hands. Finally, he said, I accept, but with one condition of mine. What? You really try? Don't stay divided with one foot in each life. You commit to being present in our marriage, to working on this with me, and in return, I promise to accept Julia into our lives and support that relationship. Helen felt something akin to hope. I promise to truly try this time. They shook hands and then hesitantly embraced. It wasn't the passionate embrace of a reconciled couple, but it was honest. It was a beginning. Telling Charles and Julia was harder. Helen gathered them in the small living room, her heart broken but determined. I'm going back to Robert, she said bluntly, but I'm not abandoning you. I will never abandon you. Julia started to cry, but Helen pulled her into her lap. "Listen to me, dear. You will spend weekends with me. We will have special days just for us. I will be at all the school performances, all the birthdays, all the important moments because you are my daughter, understand? My daughter in heart. But you won't live here, Julia." She sobbed. "No, but I will be present, I promise." Charles watched everything with silent tears. "Are you sure this is what you want?" "I'm not sure of anything," Helen admitted. "But I need to try. I need to give my marriage a real chance. And Robert promised that Julia is part of this. He is willing to open his heart to her, to you." "Will he help financially?" Charles asked. "Not for me, but for Julia, for her education, opportunities." Helen nodded. "Robert wants to make sure Julia has everything she needs. Tutors, private school if you want, extracurricular activities. He understands that she is important to me, so she is important to him." Charles ran his hand through his hair, processing. "That's generous of him. After all, he is a good man." Helen said, "Both are good men, and I'm lucky to have them both in my life, even if in different ways." That night, Helen slept in the house for the last time, or at least the last time as a resident. In the morning, she packed her few things while Julia followed her around the house, not wanting to lose sight of her. 6 months later, Helen was in the garden of the mansion planting new rose bushes. It was a sunny Saturday morning, and she was expecting special visitors. Life had found its own rhythm in the past months. Helen had moved back into the mansion and surprisingly began to feel at home, not in the way it was before, but in a new way. She and Robert were like two strangers getting to know each other, but with the advantage of a shared history, even if only one of them remembered it completely. Robert was patient, true to his word. He didn't push for physical or emotional intimacy, allowing things to develop naturally. They had dinner together every night talking about their day. They watched movies on weekends. Slowly, Helen began to see the man she had originally fallen in love with, and Julia. The girl visited every Saturday, sometimes staying the entire weekend. Robert, to his credit, welcomed her with open arms. At first, it was awkward. He clearly didn't know how to interact with children. But Julia, with her sweet and open nature, won him over. Helen heard the doorbell and smiled. She got up, wiping the dirt from her hands, and went to greet them. Julia rushed in, throwing herself into Helen's arms. "Mummy, I brought my school project to show you." Robert appeared behind Helen, smiling at the girl. "And what do you have this time, princess?" Julia proudly showed a project about plants. She had used photos from Helen's own garden, which they had taken together on one of her visits. "It's beautiful, Helen," he praised. "I'm sure you'll get an A." Charles entered last, always a bit uncomfortable in the huge mansion, but making an effort for Julia's sake. Robert extended his hand, and the two men greeted each other civilly. In the early months, the tension between Robert and Charles was palpable, but over time they developed a mutual respect. Robert acknowledged that Charles had saved and cared for Helen when she needed it most. Charles recognized that Robert genuinely loved Helen and was making a real effort to include Julia in their lives. Marissa prepared a special lunch, and they all sat together at the large table. It was a strange scene, but somehow it worked. Helen looked around the table at this family that had no conventional boundaries and felt gratitude. Mrs. Smith had also adapted, visiting frequently and even starting to bond with Julia. The girl called her Grandma Vera, which initially shocked the lady, but now filled her with joy. After lunch, while Julia played in the garden under Marissa's watchful eye, the three adults chatted on the porch. "How are things?" Charles asked Helen, a question he asked every visit. "Good," Helen replied honestly. "Robert and I are finding our way. It's not what it was before, but it's something ours, something new. Robert held Helen's hand, a gesture that had become natural in recent weeks. She's starting to trust me again. It's a slow process, but we're getting there. Charles nodded, and Helen saw something in his eyes. Acceptance, perhaps. He had moved on, too. He was still single, focused on working, and taking care of Julia, but the sharp pain, the mood had softened into a gentle melancholy. Julia is happy, Charles said. That's all that matters. She has you in her life. She has this beautiful house to visit. She has opportunities that I could never provide on my own. You gave her the most important thing, Helen said. Love, values, a present father. The rest is just extra. Speaking of which, Robert interjected, he wanted to discuss Julia's education. I researched some excellent private schools in the area. One of them has a full program with artistic and sports activities. I thought Julia might like it. Charles tensed up. That's very expensive, Robert. I can't accept that. It's not about accepting or not, Robert said gently. It's about giving Julia the best opportunities. And since Helen considers her a daughter, technically that makes us family too. Let me do this, please. Charles looked at Helen, who felt encouragingly towards him. After a long moment, he agreed. Thank you. That means a lot. Later, when Charles and Julia left, Helen and Robert stayed in the garden watching the sunset. You were very generous today, Helen said. She is important to you, Robert replied. And I'm starting to like her. She's a special girl. I can see why you bonded with her so quickly. Helen leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder. It would have been much harder if you hadn't been so understanding. It wasn't easy, Robert admitted. It still hurts sometimes, knowing that you spent so much time with them, that you developed feelings you never had a chance to have with me again. But I realized I can't compete with the past, or with what could have been. I can only work with the present, and you are doing a wonderful job. Helen turned to him. Robert, I want you to know that I'm happy, truly happy, not in the way the old Helen would be, but in my own way. That's all I wanted to hear. Robert gently kissed her forehead. I'm learning to love this new Helen. And you know, I think she's even stronger than the old one. Weeks turned into months, and the routine solidified. Julia started attending the private school, where she thrived academically and socially. Helen returned to work at the art gallery, but part-time, saving time for Julia and for herself. Charles accepted a promotion at the workshop, becoming a supervisor, which improved his financial situation. He still lived in the small house in Eastside Gardens, but now he could provide small luxuries for Julia that were previously impossible. Mrs. Smith became a regular presence in all their lives, uniting the extended family in a way no one expected. She even invited Charles and Julia to spend Christmas at her home in Santa Monica, where everyone celebrated together. A year after Helen returned to the mansion, she was in the room that had been for the baby. Robert found her, there looking at the empty space with a thoughtful expression. Are you thinking of turning this room into something? He asked gently. Actually, Helen turned to him. I was thinking of leaving it as it is, as a reminder of what we lost, but also as hope for what may still come. Do you want to try again? Robert asked, surprised. Have a baby? Maybe one day. When we're ready, Helen said, but not just us. I've been talking to Julia. She would like to have a brother or sister. Robert smiled. You really created an unconventional family, you know. It's the only family I know, Helen said, and I wouldn't change a thing. They embraced in the empty room, which one day might be filled with life again. But even if that never happened, they had Julia. They had each other. They had a family that defied all conventions, but was grounded in love, respect, and acceptance. Helen reflected on everything she had been through. The disappearance, the memory loss, living with Charles and Julia, reclaiming her memories, the painful decision to return to Robert. Every step had been difficult, every choice came with sacrifice. But in the end, she hadn't chosen between two families. She had found a way to honor both. What began with a simple phrase from a poor girl looking at a faded poster, "She lives in my house," transformed into a journey of rediscovery, love, and acceptance. Helen had lost her identity but found a new one. She had lost a love but discovered she could love in different ways. She had lost a year of her life but gained a daughter, an expanded perspective and a deeper understanding of what family meant. Family, she learned, was not defined by blood or memory or even by conscious choices. It was defined by the bonds we choose to preserve, by the people we choose to love, and by the courage to create something new when the old no longer fits. And as Helen looked out the window seeing Julia playing in the garden, Robert by her side, Charles arriving to pick her up, and Mrs. Smith waving from the porch, she knew she had found her place. Not in one house or another, not with one person or another, but in the space between them all, where love knew no bounds and family was as big as her heart allowed. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Helen, Robert, Charles and Julia has touched your hearts. This journey has shown us that love can take many forms and that family goes beyond blood or memory. If you were moved by this story of new beginnings and impossible choices, we invite you to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next stories. Leave a like if the narrative resonated with you, and share in the comments your reflections on love, family, and the difficult choices life presents us. Every comment inspires us to continue bringing stories that explore the complexity of human relationships. Every day, we bring new narratives that celebrate the strength of the human heart and the capacity to love without limits. Find our special playlist. Here are some exciting stories by clicking here on the side. Until the next story, and remember, true love always finds a way, even when that way is not what we expected. M.